Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and this week I couldn't decide what I wanted to do, so I let momentum carry me. And we're going to be reading some more C.J. Cherry, but this time we'll be reading Merchanter's Luck. It's a relatively short novel. We'll probably bang it out in a month or so, I'd guess. Not much longer than that, I should think. Probably like 4 installments. It reads pretty quickly. Unlike Downbelow Station, it is a much more personal affair. It focuses on a pretty small cast of characters, two major characters. Um, it is taking place after Downbelow Station, and after the Mercanter Alliance has come into being and all that, but it's not totally clear just how long after. It isn't long though. It's within a couple years. Um, a couple meaning like a decade or so. Um, there will be some familiar faces. Um, a lot of what this book is about is what is life like in this universe, in this setting, right after the events of, the conflict that broke out. What is the fallout of the Maziani turning tail and running towards Seoul? What is the fallout of this beginning of the era of rapprochement? Uh, but more importantly, what is life like for just like an average Joe? Just like a couple schmoes, um, small freelancers living in this setting at this time. Um, and it's pretty interesting. We're going to meet some interesting characters. I can't promise that you'll like any of them. They have their own quirks. We also learn some of the politics and dynamics of we've had allusions to them, of ship names being important, both being, people on those ships, the names of those ships, the families on those ships. We're going to have a bit of exposure to that. If slash when we get around to rim runners, which I do want to get around to. I rather liked rim runners. Um, rim runners kind of goes into that even more, leans pretty heavily into that concept. This is a solid introduction to that. Um, and Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything sensible or useful else I can say. I don't think there is. The edition of the book I am working with is not the edition pictured here. It is a combined edition entitled Alliance Space, which I think came out in the early aughts. Um, sorry, mid-aughts, 2008, which is a combined edition putting together both Merchanter's Luck and 40,000 in Gehenna, entitled Alliance Space. 40,000 in Gehenna, I keep transliterating that to at Gehenna, and that is wrong, um, is two-thirds of the volume. For sure, it is most of the volume. It is a rather heftier part, but it's not a terribly large book. Um, oh, that reminds me. 40,000 in Gehenna does have maps. I need to get a hold of those if I can. Uh, so yeah, we're going to be introduced very early to Sandor and Allison. And with that, let's get rolling. Okay, what's going on? Why are there 20 people here? Something broke. That can't be right. Let's pretend that's right and the algorithm's just favoring me. Hi. Let's get rolling with Merchanter's Luck. Merchanter's Luck by C.J. Cherry. Chapter 1. Their names were Sandor and Allison, Kreia and Riley, respectively. Riley meant something in the offices and bars of Viking Station. It meant the merchanters of the great ship Dublin again, based at Fargon, respectable haulers on a loop that included all the circle of Union stars, Mariner and Russell's, Esperance and Paradise, Wyatt's and Cytine, Fargon and Voyager, and back to Viking. It was a name, with a capital N, among merchanters, and a power to be considered wherever it went. So I'm guessing at the pronunciation of Kreia's name. It's Kreja. It could be Kreja, Sandor Kreja. But I'm going with Kreia for my own reasons. If somebody knows better, I will change it accordingly. Kreia meant nothing at Viking, having flourished only at distant Pan Paris and Esperance in its day, at Mariner under an alias. It meant a bad debt, and the same at Russell's. The Kreia ship was currently named Lucy, and she was supposedly based at Wyatt's, which was as far away as possible and almost farther away than reasonable for such a small and aged freighter, claiming to run margin cargo for a Wyatt's combine. Customs always searched her, though she called here regularly. Small, star-capable ships on which the crew was not related by blood, on which, in fact, there were only two haggard men, and one not the same as at last docking. Such ships were not comfortably received at station docks, and received careful scrutiny. Lucy was a freighter by statement, a long hauler which ran smallish consignments independent of its combine's close direction, since the combine had no offices at Viking. She was a passenger carrier when anyone would trust her. No one did, though the display boards carried her offer. She took merchanter transfers if she could get them. That was how Sandor Kreia lost his crew at Viking, because the crew, one old and limping sot who was paying work for his passage, found his own ship in port and headed for it without a by your leave. The old man had only signed as far as Viking. He had left behind at Voyager for a stay in hospital. He had been left behind at Voyager for a stay in hospital, and he was simply interested in catching his own ship again and rejoining his family. That was the deal. It made Sandor nervous, that departure, as all such departures did. The old man had been more curious than most, had nosed about contrary to orders, had been into everything, lied, with epic distortion, about where his Daisy had been, lied about deals they had made and what they had done in the wars and what he had done in dockside sleepovers, entertaining as it was. His departure left Sandor solo on Lucy, which he had been before, and had no wish to try more often than he had to, running a freighter blind tired. But more, the old man left him with a nagging worry that he might have turned up something, and that his considerable talent for storytelling might spread tales in station-side bars that Lucy had peculiarities. Viking had tightened up since Lucy's last docking. Warships had pulled in, and rumors surmised pirate trouble. They were nervous times, and a little talk in the wrong places could get back to station offices. It might, Sandor thought, be time to move on. But he had conned his way onto the loading schedule, which meant they were going to fill his tanks and he was going to get cargo if he could only subdue his nervousness and keep from rousing suspicions this trip round. Forged papers labeled him and Lucy as Wyatt's Star Combine, which had a minor interest-bearing account at Voyager and Viking outside its territories, a fund meant for emergency use if ever one of its ships should have to divert over from regular WSC ports. It was his seventh call here on the same faked papers. In fact, he foresaw the time when the stamp sheets in the book would be filled, and Station would have to renew his papers with the real thing, a threshold he had crossed before, and which made life for a time much more secure, until some needed repair ran him over his margin and the questions got sharp and closer. He was not a pirate. Lucy was too small for piracy, and her smallish armament was a joke. He was, in his own reckoning, not even completely a thief, because he skimmed enough to keep him going, but nothing on a large scale. He delivered his cargoes where they belonged and let the money right back into WSC accounts. He made a very little profit, to be sure, and that little profit could be tipped right into the loss column if Lucy got stalled at dock without cargo, if Lucy needed some major repair. It was the reason why no combine would accept her honest application. She was small and carried small cargoes, across the two large distances the bigger ships could cross much more quickly. She had gone into the red now and again at Viking, losses that would have broken an independent, without the forged papers to draw credit on. But all a big company like WSC would notice when the accounts cycled round at year's end was that the main fund had neither increased nor decreased. As long as Lucy paid back what she took out by year's end, the excess could stay in her illicit working account to cushion her future ups and downs of profit. WSC spread over light years and time lag. Alarms only rang down the system at audit time, and Sandor had no desire at all to go beyond small pilferage, no ambition to reach for profits that might get him caught. He was 27 and impossibly rich, in terms of being sole remaining heir to a star freighter, however small, which had been a legitimate trader once, before the Company War created pirates, and pirates stopped and looted her and left her a stripped shell mostly filled with dead. Now Lucy survived as best she could on her owner's ingenuity, under a multitude of names and numbers and a succession of faked papers. Now selling out was impossible. His scams would catch up with him and eat away even the 30 of silver he would get for his ship. Worse, he would have to sit on station and watch her come and go in the hands of some local combine, or see her junked because she was 150 years old and her parts might prove more valuable than her service. He kept her going. She was his, in a way no stationer-run combine could understand. He had been born on her, had grown up on her, had no idea what the universe would be like without the ship around him, and he never meant to find out. The day he lost Lucy, and it could happen any day, with one of the station officers running up with attachment warrants from somewhere, or with some sharp-eyed dockmaster or customs agent taking a notion to run a test on his forged papers. On that day he figured they would have to kill him. But they would take him in whole if they could, because station law was relentlessly humane, and Union took as dim a view of shootings on dockside as they did of pilferage. They would put him in the tank and alter his mind so that he could be happy scrubbing floors and drawing a station-side living, a model Union citizen. Stations scared him spitless. And that talkative old man who had gone back to his ship scared him. But he had it figured out a long time ago that the worst thing he could do for himself was to look scared, and the quickest way to rouse suspicions was to act defensive or to stay holed up in Lucy's safety during dockings, when any normal merchanter would use the chance to go out bar-hopping dockside, up the long curve of taverns and sleepovers on the docks. He was smooth-faced and good-looking in a gaunt, blond way that could be a stationer accountant or a banker bar-hopping, except that the gauntness was hunger and the eyes showed it, so that he laughed a great deal when he was scouting the bars, to look as if he were well credited, and sometimes to get drinks on someone else. And this time, because his life depended on it, He aimed for more than a free drink or a meal on some other Combine's credit. He needed a crewman, someone, anyone, with the right touch of minor larceny who could be conned and cozened aboard and trusted not to talk in the wrong quarters. This was flatly dangerous. Merchanters' ships were family, all of the same name, born on a ship to die on that ship. Beached merchanters were beached only for a single run, like the old man he had gotten from hospital. Or if they were beached permanently, it was because their own ship's families had thrown them out, or because they had voluntarily quit their families, unable to live with them. Some of the latter were quarrelsome, and some were criminal. He was one man, and he had to sleep sometimes. Which was why he had to have help on the ship at all. He scanned the corners of the bars he traveled on the long green zone dock of Viking, trying not to see the soldiers and the police who were more frequent everywhere than usual, and looking constantly for someone else as hungry as he was, knowing that they would be disguising their plight as he disguised it, and knowing that if he picked the wrong one with a shade too much larceny in mind, that partner would simply cut his throat some watch in some lonely part of the between, and take Lucy over for whatever purposes he had in mind. It was the first day of this hunt on the docks, playing the part of honest merchanter captain and nursing a handful of chits he had gotten on that faked Combine account, that he first saw Allison Riley. The story was there to be read. The shamrock and stars on her silver coveralls sleeve, the patches of worlds visited that encompassed all known space, the lithe, tall body with its back to him at the bar, and a flood of hair like a puff of space itself in the dim neon light. In his alcohol-fumed eyes, that sweep of hip and long, leaning limbs put him poignantly in mind of sleepovers and that other scanted need of his existence, a scam much harder than visa forging and far more dangerous. In fact, his life had been womanless, except for one very drunk in-system merchanter one night on Mariner when he was living high and secure, which was how Mariner knew his name and laid in wait for him, and another in-systemer before that, who he had hoped would partner him for good. She had lost him Esperance when it went bad. He was solitary because the only women for merchanters were other merchanters, who inevitably had relatives, and merchanters in general were a danger to his existence far more serious than stations posed. Stations sat fixed about their stars and rarely shared records on petty crime for the same reasons the big combines rarely bothered with distant and minor accounts. But get on the bad side of some merchanter family for any cause, and they would spread the word and hunt him from star to star, spread warnings about him to every station and every world humans touched, so that he would die, or that some station would catch him finally and bend his mind, which was the same to him. There were no more women. He had sworn off such approaches. But he dreamed, being 27 and alone for almost all his days, in the long, long night. And at that silver coveralled vision in front of him, he forgot the tatter-elbowed old man he had been trying to stalk, him with the vacant spot in the patches on his sleeve, and forgot the short-hauler kid who was another and safer prospect. He stared at that sleek back, and saw that fall of hair like a night in which stars could burn, and saw at the same time that arm resting on the bar, patched with the Riley shamrock, which burned green in the green neon glare from the over-the-bar lighting, advising him that among merchanters this was one of the foremost rank, a princess, a name, and a patch which was credit wherever it liked, that walked wide and did as it pleased. Nothing like Lucy had a prayer against Dublin again, that great and modern wonder which meant clean corridors and clean coveralls and credit piled in station accounts from Cytene to Pell. They were Dubliners with her, cousins or brothers, big, dark-haired men of varying ages. He saw them in a fog beyond her, talking to her, and her arm lifted the glass and her hair swung with the spark of the changing neon like red stars. She was turning on her elbow to set the glass down, a second swirl of starry night. Ah, he pleaded to God fuzzily, not wanting to see her face, because perhaps she was not beautiful at all, and he could look away in time and make that beautiful back and cloud of hair into his own drink-fogged dream to keep him company on the long watches, as long as she had no face. But he was too paralyzed to move, and in that same long motion she turned all the way around, shook back the living night from her face, that was all blue now in the changing neon lights. He was caught then, because he forgot to laugh, and forgot everything else he was doing in that bar, stared with his mouth open and his eyes showing what they showed when he was not laughing. He knew so, because she suddenly looked nettled. She stood straight from the bar, which movement drew his eyes to the A. Riley stitched over the blue-lit silver of a breast, while she was looking him over and sizing him up for the threadbare brown coveralls he wore and the undistinguished and lying E. Stevens his pocket bore, and the gaudy nymph with Lucy ribboned on his sleeve. The nymph was a standard item in shops which sold such things. It decorated any number of ships and sleeves, naked and girdled with stars and badly embroidered with the ribbon blank, to be stitched in with any ship's name. In-system haulers used such things. Miners did. He did, because it was what he could afford. She stared a good long moment, and turned then and searched her pocket. Her crewmates had gone elsewhere, and she paused to glance at one who was himself making slow stalk of a woman of another crew, off in the dim corner. She tossed a chit down on the water-circled counter and walked for the door alone, while Sandor stood there watching that retreating back and that cloud of space itself enter the forever day of the open dock outside. He called the bartender urgently and paid. No tip, at which the man scowled, but he was used to that. He hurried, trying not to seem in haste, thinking of the woman's cousins and not wanting to have them on his tail. His heart was pounding, and his skin had that hot-cold flush that was part raw lust and part stark panic, because what he was doing was dangerous, with the docks as tense as they were, with police watching where they were never invited by merchanters. He had dreamed something in the lonely years, which was, he could no longer remember whether the dream was different from what he had seen standing alive in front of him, because all those solitary fancies were murdered, done in cold, pale death in that collision, because he had seen the one bright vision of his life. He was going to hurt forever. The more so if he could not find out in brighter light that her face had some redeeming flaws, if he could not have her herself murder the image and his hopes at once, and give him back his common sense. "You'll not have tried," kept hammering in his brain. "You'll never know." Another, dimmer self kept telling him he was drunk, and yet another self cursed him that he was going to lose everything he had. But the self that was in control only advised him that he was lost out here in the glare of dock lights, that she had gotten away into another bar or a shop somewhere close. He looked about him at the long up-curve of the dock, which was curtained by section arches and peopled with hundreds of passer-by, battered with music and bright lights and sounds of machinery. Tall metal skeletons of gantries ran skeins of umbilicals to the dock. Oh, sorry. I skipped a line. Tall metal skeletons of gantries ran skeins of umbilicals to the various lighted caverns that were ship accesses across the dock, but she surely had not had time to reach one. He went right, instead, to the next bar up the row, looked about him in the doorway of the dim, alcohol-musked interior, which drew attention he never liked to have on him. He ducked out again and tried the next, and the third, which was fancier, the kind of place where resident stationers might come, or military officers, when they wanted a taste of the docks. She was there. Alone, half perched on a bar stool in the silver extravagance of the place, a waft of the merchanter life stationers would come to this dockside bar to see, a touch of something exotic and dangerous. And maybe a stationer was what she was looking for, some manicured banker, some corporation man, or someone she could run a high scam on, for the kind of inside information the big ships got regularly and the likes of Lucy never would. Or maybe she wanted the kind of fine liquor and world-grown luxury a local might treat her to, and some liked. He was daunted. He stood just inside the doorway, finding himself in the kind of place he avoided, where drinks were 3 times what they ought to be, and he was as far as he could possibly be from doing what he had come to do, which was to find some crewman in as desperate straits as he was. She saw him. He stared back at her in that polished, overpriced place, and felt like running. And then, because he had never liked running, and because he was a degree soberer than he had been a moment ago, and insisted on suffering for his stupidity, he walked a little closer, with his hand in his pocket, feeling over the few chits he had left, and wishing they posted prices in this place. She rested with her elbow on the bar, looking as if she belonged. And he had no cover left, not with her recognizing him, a man with a no-name patch on his sleeve, and no way to claim coincidence in being in this place. He had never felt so naked in his life, not even in front of station police with faked papers. "Buy you a drink?" he asked, the depth of his originality. She was, maybe, the middle range of 20. She bar-hopped alone with that shamrock on her sleeve, and she was safe to do that. No one rolled a Dubliner in a sleepover and planned to live. It might be her plan to get very drunk and to take up with whomever she fancied, if she fancied anyone. She might be hunting information, and she might be eager to get rid of him, not to hamper her search with inconsequence. She was dangerous, not alone to his pride and his dream. Oh, she was dangerous, not alone to his pride and his dreams. She motioned to the stool beside hers, and he came and eased onto it with a vast numbness in the middle of him and a cold sweat on his palms. He looked up nervously at the barkeeper, who arrived and looked narrowly at him. "Your choice," Sandor said to A. Riley, and she lifted the glass she had mostly finished. "2," he managed to say then, and the bartender went off. Two of that, he was thinking, might be expensive. They might be the most expensive drinks he had ever bought, if a bad bar bill brought questions down on the rest of his currently shaky finances. He looked into A. Riley's midnight eyes with a genuine desperation, and the thought occurred to him that being arrested would be only slightly worse than admitting to poverty in the Dubliner's presence. "Lucy." She read his patch aloud, tilting her head to see the side of his arm. "In Systemer?" "No," he said, a hot flush rising to his face. His indignation won him at least a momentary lift of her head and deprecation of the question she had asked, because a jump ship was far and away a different class of operation from the in-system haulers and miners. In that sense, at least, Lucy and Dublin were on the same scale. "Where are you based, then?" she asked, either mercy-killing the silence or being sensibly cautious in her barside contacts. "Here?" "Wyatt's," he said. The bartender returned with 2 drinks and hesitated, giving him the kind of look which said he would like to see a credit chit if it were him alone, but the barman slid a thoughtful eye over to the shamrock patch and moved off in silence. Sandor took both glasses and pushed the one toward A. Riley, who was on the last of her first. "Thanks," she said. He limited his swallow to less than he wanted, hoping to make it last, and to slow her down, because they laid down more in tips in this place than he spent on meals. And desperately he tried to think of some casual question to ask of her in return. He could not, because everyone knew where Dublin was based, and asking more sounded like snoopery from someone like himself. "You in for long?" she asked. "3 days." He pounced on the question with relief. "Gonna fill the tanks and take on cargo. Going on to Fargon from here. I don't have a big ship, but she's mine, free and clear. I'm getting a little ahead these days, trying to take on a crew here." "Oh." A small, flat "oh." It was apprehension what class he was. "I'm legitimate. I just had some bad luck up till now. You don't know of any honest long jumpers beached here, do you?" She shook her head, still with that look in her eyes, wary of her uninvited drinking partner. Sometimes such uncrewed ships and such approaches by strangers in bars meant pirate spies, and even huge Dublin had them to fear. He saw it building, foresaw an appeal to authorities who would jump fast when a Dubliner yelled hazard. There were fleet officers drinking at a nearby table. Security was heavy out on the docks, with rumors of an operation against the pirates, but others said it had to do with Pell, or interzone disputes, or they were checking smuggling. He smiled desperately. "Pirates," he said. "Long time back. My family's all dead, and my hired crew ran on me and near robbed me blind one time and the other. You know what you can hire off the docks. It's not safe, but I haven't got a choice." "Oh," she said, but it was a better "oh" than the last, indeterminate. A frown edged with sympathy and hazardous curiosity. "No, I don't know. Sometimes we get people wanting to sign on as temporaries, but we don't take 'em. And we haven't had any at Viking that I've heard of. Sorry. If station registry doesn't list them." "I wouldn't take locals," he said, and then tried the truth. "Nah, I would, if it got me out on schedule. Anyway, Lucy's mine, and I was out hunting prospects, not—" "You rate me a prospect?" She was laughing at him. That was at least better than suspicion. He grinned, swallowing his pride. "I couldn't persuade you, could I?" She laughed outright, and his heart beat the harder, because he knew what game she was playing at the moment. It was Merchanter's oldest game of all but trade itself, and the fact that she joined the maneuvering in good humor brought him a sweating flush of hope. He took a second sip of the forgotten glass, and she took a healthy drain on her second. "Lost your crew here?" she asked. "You can't have gotten in alone." "Yes, lost him here. He'd been in hospital. He hired on for passage and caught his ship here, so that was it." He drank and watched in dismay as she waved at someone she knew, an inconspicuous wave at a dark-bearded man who drifted in from the doorway and lingered a moment beside them. "All right?" that one asked. "All right," she said. He was another Dubliner, older, grim. The shamrock and stars were plain on his sleeve, and he carried a collar stripe. Sandor sat still under that dark-eyed, unloving scrutiny, his face tautened in what was not quite a smile. The older man lingered, just long enough to warn, and walked on out the door. Sandor stared after him, turned slightly in his seat to do so, still ruffled, turned back again with the feeling that A. Riley would be amused at his discomfiture. She was. She took the second drink down a third. Her cheeks were looking flushed. "What kind of hauling is your Lucy? General?" "Very." "You don't ask many questions. What does the A stand for?" "Allison." "What's the E?" "Edward." "Not Ed." "Ed, if you like." "Captain." "And crew." She seemed amused, finished the drink, and tapped a long, peach-lacquered fingernail against the glass, making a gentle ringing. The barkeeper showed up. "I'll stay with the same," she said, and when he left, looked up with a tilt of her head at Sandor. "I mixed that and wine on Cytine once and nearly missed my ship." "They don't taste strong," he said, and with a sinking heart cast a glance at the bartender who was mixing up another small glass of expensive froth. and a second one for him, which was a foul trick and one they could pull in a place like this. "Love them," she said when the bartender came back and set both down. She picked up hers and sipped. "A local delicacy, just done Viking and Pell. You come all the way from Wyatt's, do you? That's quite a distance for a smallish ship. What combine is that? I didn't hear you say." "WSC." He was close to panic. What with the bill and the questions which were hitting into areas he wanted left alone. Misery churned in his stomach, which the frothy drink did nothing to comfort. "I run margin wherever there's room for a carrier. I'm close to independent. But Dublin fairly well runs her own combine, doesn't she? You go the whole circle. That's independent." He talked nonsense, to drag the question back to Dublin, back to her, staring into her eyes and suspecting that all this was at his expense, that some kind of high sign had just been passed between her and her bearded kinsman who had strayed through the door and out again. Possibly someone was waiting outside to start trouble, or she was going to have her amusement as far as frustrated him and walk off, leaving him the bill. He was soberer after this one more drink than he had been when he came in here, excepting a certain numbness in his fingers, and while she looked no less beautiful, his desire was cooled by that sobriety and by a certain wry amusement which persisted in her expression. He put on a good face, as he would do with a curious customs agent or a dockside dealer who meant to bluff his price down. He grinned, and she smiled. "None of the chatter means anything to you," he said. "What questions am I supposed to ask?" "You buy me a drink," she said, and set hers down, half finished. "You don't buy anything else, of course, being wiser than some stationers I know, who don't know how far their money goes. Thank you, Stevens. I did enjoy it. Good luck to you, finding crew." The bartender, operating on his own keen reflexes, was headed his way in a hurry, seeing who was leaving and who was being left to pay. Sandor saw that with his own tail of the eye watch for trouble, felt in his pocket desperately and threw down what he had as Allison Riley headed for the door and the lighted dock. He was off his stool and almost with her when the voice rang out, You there! That's short!" Sandor stopped, frozen by that voice, when in another place he might have dodged out, when in ordinary sanity he would not be in that situation. The military officers had looked up from their drinking. Others had. He felt theatrically in his pocket. "I gave you a 20, sir." The bartender scowled and held out the palm with the chits. "Not a 20. Demis and a 10." Sandor assumed outrage, stalked back, and put on chagrin. "I do beg pardon, sir. I was shorted myself, then, next door, because I should have had a 20. I think I'm a little drunk, sir, but I have credit. Can we arrange this?" The bartender glowered, but there came a presence at Sandor's shoulder, and "Charge it to Dublin," Allison Riley said. Sandor looked about into Allison Riley's small smile and very plain stare. They were about of a size, and it was a level glance indeed. "Want to step outside?" she asked. He nodded, fright and temper and alcohol muddling into one adrenaline haze. He followed that slim coveralled figure with the midnight hair those few steps outside into the light, and the noise of the docks was sufficient to cool his head again. He had, he reckoned, been paid off well enough, scammed by an expert. He smiled ruefully at her when they stopped and she turned to face him. It was not what he was feeling at the moment, which was more a desire to break something, but good humor was obligatory on a man with empty pockets and a Dubliner's drinks in his belly. There were always her cousins, at least several hundred of them. "Does that line work often?" she asked. "I'll pay you the tab," he said, which he could not believe he was saying, but he reckoned that he could draw another 20 out of his margin account. He hated having been trapped and having been rescued. "I have it. I just don't walk the docks with much." She stared at him as if weighing that. Or him. or thinking of calling her cousins. "I take it that all of this was leading somewhere." She did it to him again, set him completely off balance. "It might have," he said with the same wry humor, "but I'm headed back to my ship. You got all my change, and I'm afraid Lucy's accommodations aren't what you're used to." "Huh." She looked in her pocket and brought out a single 50. "Bradford's. I know it. It's a class accommodation." He blinked, overthrown again, trying to figure if she had believed him anywhere down the line, or what she saw in the likes of him. She might be setting him up for another and worse joke than the last. But he wanted her. That was there again, worse than before, obscuring all caution and choking off all clever argument. Years of dreaming solitary dreams and looking to stay alive, barely alive, which was all it came to. And one night in a silver bar and a high-class sleepover. He had gotten hazardously drunk, he told himself, floating in an overload of senses, and so had she gotten drunk. She was deliberately picking someone like him who was a risk, because she was curious, or because she was bored, or because Bradford's was a Dublin hangout and one shout was going to bring more trouble down on him than he could deal with. His hand was still cold sweating when they linked arms and walked in the direction she chose, and he wiped his palm on the pocket lining before he took her cool, dry hand in his. They walked the dock, along which gantries pointed at the distant, unseen core, towers aimed straight up beside them that looked Oh, whoops. Towers aimed straight up beside them as they walked, and farther along aimed askew, so that they looked like the veined segments of some gigantic fruit, and the dock they walked unrolled like some gray spool of ribbon with a tinsel left-hand edge of neon-lit bars and restaurants and shop display windows. Viking Dock had a set of smells all its own, part food and part liquor and part machinery and chemicals and the forbidding musky chill of open cargo locks. It had a set of sounds that was human noise. It had a set of sounds that was human noise and machinery working. Sorry. It had a set of sounds that was human noise and machinery working, and music that wafted out of bars in combinations sometimes discordant and sometimes oddly fit. It was a giddy, sense-battering flow he had never given way to, not like this, not with a silver Dubliner woman arm in arm with him, step for step with him, weaving in and out among the crowds. They reached Bradford's discreet front, with the smoked oval pressure windows and the gold lettering, walked in, checked in at the desk with a comp register presided over by a clerk who might have been a corporate receptionist. They stood on thick carpets, under fancy lighting, everything white and gold, where the foyer door shut out the gaudy noise of the docks. She paid, and got the room card, and grinned at him, took his arm and led the way down the thick carpeted hall to a numbered doorway. She thrust the card into the slot and opened it. It was a sleeper of the class of the bar they had just come from, a place he could never afford. All cream satin, with a conspicuous blue and cream bed and a cream-tiled bath with a shower. For a moment he was put off by such luxury, which he had never so much as seen in his life. Then pride took hold of him, and he slipped his arm about Alison Riley and pulled her close against him with a jerk which drew an instinctive resistance. He grinned when he did it, and she pushed back with a look that at once warned and chose to be amused. He took account of that on the instant, that in fact his humor was a facade, which she had seen through constantly. It might not work so well, here with a Dubliner's pride on a Dubliner's money. He reckoned suddenly that he could make one bad enemy, or, perhaps, save something to remember in the far long darks between stations. She scared him, that was the plain fact, because she had all the cards that mattered. And he could too easily believe that she was going to laugh, or talk about this to her cousins, and laugh in telling them how she had bought herself a night's amusement and had a joke at his expense. Worst of all, he was afraid he was going to freeze with her, because every time he was half persuaded it was real, he had the nagging suspicion she knew what he was. And that meant police. He steadied her face in his hand and tried kissing her, a tentative move, a courtesy between dock-met strangers. She leaned against him and answered in kind until the blood was hammering in his veins. "Shouldn't we close the door?" she suggested then, a practicality which slammed him back to level again. "Shouldn't we close the door?" she suggested then, a practicality which slammed him back to level again. He let her go and pushed the door switch, looked back again desperately, beginning to suspect that the whole situation was humorous, and that he deserved laughing at, even by himself. He was older than she was, but he was, he reckoned, far younger in such encounters. Naive. Scared. On for a shower," Allison Riley said cheerfully, and started shedding the silver coveralls. "You too?" He started shedding his own, at once embarrassed because he was off balance in the casualness of her approach, and because he still suspected humor in what with him was beginning to be shatteringly serious. She laughed. She splashed him with soap, and managed to laugh in the shower and tumbling in the bed with the blue sheets, but not at all moments. For a long, long while she was very serious indeed, and he was. They made love with total concentration until they ended curled in each other's arms and utterly exhausted. He woke. The lights were still on as they had been, and Allison stirred and murmured about her watch and Dublin, while he held on to her with a great and desperate melancholy and a question boiling in him that had been there half the night. "Meet you again?" he asked. "Sometime," she said, tracing a finger down his jaw. "I'm headed out this afternoon." His heart plummeted. "Where next?" A little frown creased her brow. "Pearl," she said finally. "That's not on the boards, but you could find it in the offices. Going across the line. Got a deal working there. Be back maybe next year, local." His heart sank further. He lay there a moment, thinking about his papers, his cargo, his hopes. About an old man who might talk, and fortunes that had shaved the profit in his account to the bone. Year's end was coming. If he had to, he could lay over and skim nothing more until the new year, but it would rouse suspicion, and it would run up a dock charge he might not work off. "What deal it, pal?" he asked. "Is that what's got the military stirred up?" "You hear a lot of things on the docks," she said, cautious and frowning. "But what's that to you?" "I'll see you at Pell." "That's crazy. You said you were due at Fargon." "I'll see you at Pell." The frown deepened. She shifted in his arms, leaned on him, looking down into his face. "We're pulling out today. Just how fast is your Lucy? You think a marginer's going to run races with Dublin?" "So you'll be shifting mass. I'm empty. I'll make it." "Divert your ship? What's your combine going to say? Tell me that." "I'll be there." She was quiet for a moment, then ducked her head and laughed softly, not believing him. "Got a few hours yet," she reminded him. They used them. And when she left, toward noon, he walked her out to the dockside near her own ship, and watched her walk away, a trim, silver coveralled figure, the way he had seen her first. He was sober now, and ought to have recovered, ought to shrug and call it enough. He ought to take himself and his ideas back to real space and find that in-systemer kid who might have ambitions of learning jump ships. He had knowledge to sell, at least, to someone desperate enough to sign with him, although the last and only promising novice he had signed had gotten strung out on the during jump trank and not come down again or known clearly what he was doing when he had dosed himself too deeply and died of it. Try another kid, maybe. Take another chance. He talked well. That was always his best skill, that he could talk his way into and out of anything. He ought to take up where he had left off last night, scouting the bars and promoting himself the help he needed. He had cargo coming, the tag ends of station commerce, if he only waited and if some larger ship failed to snatch it, and if a certain old man kept his gossip to his own ship. But he watched her walk away to a place he could not reach, and he had found nothing in all his life but Lucy herself that had wound herself that deeply into his gut. Lucy against Dublin again. There was that talk of new runs opening at Pell, the hinder stars being visited again, of trade with Saul, and while that rumor was almost annual, there was something like substance to it this time. The military was stirred up. Ships had gone that way. Dublin was going. Had a deal, she had said, and then shut up about it. The idea seized him, shook at him. He loved two things in his life that were not dead, and one of them was Lucy, and the other was the dream of Allison Riley. Lucy was real, he told himself, and he could lose her, while Allison Riley was too new to know, and far too many-sided. The situation with his accounts was not yet hopeless. He had been tighter than this, and still made the balance. He ought to stick to what he had, and not gamble at all. And go where, then? And do what? He could not leave Dublin's track without thinking how lonely it was out there, and never dock at a station without hoping that somehow, somewhen, Dublin would cross his path. A year from now, local, and he might not be here. Might be, no knowing where. Might be, no knowing where. Much better. Or caught, before he was much older, caught and mind-washed, so that he would see Dublin come in and not remember or not feel when they had stripped his Lucy down to parts and done much the same with him. He stood there, more obvious in his stillness than he ever liked to be, out in the middle of the dock, and then started for dockside offices with far more haste than he ever liked to use in his movements, and browbeat the dockmaster's agent with more eloquence than he had mustered in an eloquent career, urging a private message which had just been couriered in, and the need to get moving at once to Voyager. So just fill the tanks, he begged of them, with that desperation calculated to give the meanest docksider a momentary sense of power, and to let that docksider recall that supposedly he was Wyatt's Star Combine, which might, if balked, receive reports up the line, and take offense at delay. Just that much. Give me dry goods, no freezer stuff if it takes too long. I'll boil water from the tanks. Just get those lines on and get me moving. There was what he had half expected, a palm open on the counter, right in the open office. He sweated, recalling police, recalling that ominous line of military ships docked just outside these offices on Blue Dock, two carriers in port, no less, with troops like Viking stationers, unnervingly alike in size and build and manner, the stamp of birth labs. But tape-trained or not, Union citizens or not, there was the occasional open hand. If it was not a police trap. And that was possible, too. He looked up into eyes quite disconnected from that open palm. "You arrange me bank clearance, will you?" Sandor asked. "I really need to speed things up a bit. You think you can do that?" Clerical lips pursed. The man consulted comp, did some figuring. "Voyager, is it? You know your margin's down to 5,000. I figure for 2 for contingencies, at least." He shuddered. 2 was exorbitant. Dipping to the bottom of his already low margin account, the next move went right through into WSC's main fund. It would surely do that with the current dock charges added on. There had been a chance of coming back here. Had been. But this would bring the auditors running. He nodded blandly. "You help me with that, then, will you?" I really need that draft." The man turned and keyed a printout from a desk console. Comp spat out a form. He laid it on the counter. "Make it out to yourself. I can disperse here for convenience." "I really appreciate this." He leaned against the counter and made out the form for 7, smiled painfully as he handed it back to the official, who counted him out the money from the office safe. Union scrip, not station chits. Bills in 500s. "Maybe," said the clerk, I should walk with you down there and pass the word to the dock supervisor about your emergency. I think we can get you out of here shortly." He kept smiling and waited for the clerk to get his coat, walked with him outside, into the busy office district of the docks. "When those lines are hooked up and when the food's headed in," he said, his hand on the bills in his pocket, "then I'll be full of gratitude. But I expect frozen goods for this, and without holding me up. You sting me like I was a big operation, you see that I get all the supplies I'm due for it." "Don't push your luck, Captain." "I'm sure you can do it. I have faith in you. If I get questioned on this, so do you. Think of that." A silence while they walked. There were the warship accesses at their right, bright and cheerful as merchanter accesses, but uniformed troops came and went there, and security guards with guns stood at various of the offices on dockside. Birth lab soldiers, alike to the point of eeriness. Perhaps stationers, many of them from like origins, found it all less strange. The man beside him now, this man was from the war years, might have been on Viking during the fall, maybe had memories, the same as a merchanter recalled the taking of his ship. Bloody years. They shared that much, he and the stationer. Dislike of the troops. A certain nervousness. A sense that a little cash in pocket was a good thing to have when tensions ran high. There was a time they had evacuated stations, shifted populations about, when merchanters had run for the far deep and stayed there for self-protection, while warships had decided politics. No one looked for such years again, but the reflexes were still there. "Hard times," Sandor said finally, when they were on Blue Dock's margin and walking through the section arch to green. "Big ships take care of themselves, but small ships have worries. I really need those goods." Continued silence. Finally, "You hear anything down the line?" the man asked. Nothing solid. Maziani hitting ships. Hang! What can I do? I don't have the kind of margin I can take out and not haul for months like some others might do. I don't have it. Little ships like me, Combine forgets about us when trouble hits on that scale. WSC is stationer run, and they're going to say haul, come what may. And some of their big haulers are going to hide out, while the likes of me gets caught in the middle. But who'll keep the stations going? Marginers and independents and the like. I'd really like those frozen goods." "Cost you extra." "No way! You stung me for the 2. I do it again and get closer and closer to a company audit, man. You think 2,000's nothing? In an account my size, it's something." "You think your Combine's pulling you out of here?" "Don't know what they're gonna do." "Running under the table courier, it sounds like they want you out of here." "I don't know." Silence again. "Bet they're not going to check that account too closely. Bet they'll be more than glad to get their ships herded into safer zones if there's action around here. They're realists. They know their ships have got to protect themselves, in all senses. You know the gold market." His pulse sped. "I know I'm not licensed to transport." "Times like these, value goes up. The less on a station, value goes up. A lot of merchanters like to carry a little in pocket." "I can't do that kind of thing. WSC'd have my head." "Get you, say, some oddments, little stuff. You put 14 more with that extra 1,000, and I know a dealer can get you a station standard price plus 15%. Good rate for a merchanter, same as the big ships get." The station air hit his face with a sickly chill, touching perspiration. "You know you're talking about felony. That's not skimming. That's theft."
How worried are you? If your combine pulls you out, if it gets hot, maybe it's going to cost you heavy. As long as you put it in again where you're going, you're covered, and you can pocket the increase it's made.
Won't increase that much going away from trouble.
Oh, it will. It always does. It's the smart thing. Always good on stations, can't be traced, buys you all kinds of things. And if there's any kind of trouble, it goes up.
He swallowed the knot in his throat. Right. Well, you get me that check and I'll do it, but I don't handle it at any stage.
It'll cost you another 1,000 on all that deal. My risk.
If I'm first on the docking schedule and those goods get aboard while I'm filling.
No problem.
He was loaded in 2 hours, signed, cleared, and belted in, undocking from Viking with a gentle puff of Lucy's bow vents, which eased him back and tended to a little pitch. He let the accustomed pitch increase, which was a misaimed jet, but he knew Lucy and had never fixed it. The pitch always set her for an axis roll, and a little aft venting sent her over and out, still within her given lane, because she was small and could pull maneuvers like that, which were usually for the military ships. He never showed more flash than that in a station's vicinity. He had more potential attention than he wanted. He had committed felony theft, faked papers, faked IDs, had unlicensed cargo aboard, and it was time to change Lucy's name again. If he had the time. If he had had the time. He put on aft vid and saw Dublin again, had gone right past her, that silver, beautiful ship, all aglow with her own running lights and the station's floods, in station shadow, so that she shone like a jewel among the others. Not so far away, a Union dart ship stood off from dock, dull surfaced and ominous, with vanes conspicuously larger than any merchanter afforded. It watched, its frame bristling with armaments and receptors. Viking's sullen star swung behind it as he moved, silhouetting it in bleeding fire, and he lost sight of Dublin in the glare. Shut vid down, listening to the station central's ordinary voice, giving him his clear heading for the outgoing jump range, for a supposed jump for Voyager Station. Chapter 2. It was no small job to clear Dublin again for undock. Gathering and accounting for the crew was an undertaking in itself. 1,882 lives were registered to Dublin, of which the vast majority were scattered out over the docks on Liberty, and most of those had been gone for 4 days, in one and the other sleepovers around the vast torus of Viking, not alone on Green Dock, but spread through every docking section but Blue and the Industrial Corps. They knew their time, and they came in, to log their time at whatever job wanted doing, if there was a job handy, to shove their ID tags into the slot when they were ready for absolute and irrevocable boarding, passing that green line on the airlock floor and walls that let them know they were logged on and would be left without search or sympathy if they crossed that line without leave of the watch officer. 146 Dubliners were entitled to wear the green stars of executive crew. Of that number, 76 wore the collar stripe of senior seated crew, main day and altar day. 4 wore the captain's circle, one for each of 4 duty shifts. 24, at one level and the other, were entitled to sit in the chair in theory, or to take the other bridge posts. And 16 were retired from that slot who had experience, if not the physical ability. They advised, and sat in executive council. It took 7 working posts at COM to run Dublin in some operations, at any one moment. 8 posts at scan, with 4 more at the op board that monitored cargo status.
25 techs and as many cargo specialists on a watch kept things in order, and with all told, posted crew and backup personnel, that was 446 who wore the insignia of working crew, and 279 unposted, who trained and waited and worked as they could. There were the retired, over 200 of them, whose rejuve had given out and whose health faded, some of whom still went out on dockside, and some of whom took to their quarters or to sick bay and expected to die when jump stress put too great a burden on them. There were the children, nearly 200 under the age of 20, 120 of whom had duties and took liberty when Dublin docked, and 40 of those on the same privilege as the crew, to sleep over where they chose. And at main day, 1550 hours, Dublin's strayed sons and daughters headed aboard like a silver-clad flood, past the hiss and clank of loading canisters. Some of them had had a call for 1400, and some for 1200. Those in charge of cargo, all the Rileys, they were all Rileys, all 1082 of them, excepting Henry Megan and Liz Tyler, who were married aboard from other ships. Everyone forgot their alien names and called them Rileys by habit, making no distinction. All the Rileys were headed in, out of the gaudy lighted bars and glittering shops and sleepovers, carrying purchases and packages, and in many cases lingering for a demonstrative farewell to some liberty's love on the verge of Dublin's clear zone. No customs checked them off the station. They came as they liked, and Alison Riley walked up the ramp and through the yellow, chill gullet of the access tube to the lock, carrying 2 bottles of Cyteen's Best, a collection of microfiches, 2 pairs of socks, a deep study tape, and 6 tubes of hand lotion. Not a good place to shop, Viking, which was mostly mining and shipbuilding. There was freight and duty on all of it but the microfiches and the tape, but they were headed over the line into Alliance territory, and most everyone was buying something in the thought that goods in that foreign territory might be different or harder to come by, and there was a general rush to pick up this and that item. She needed the socks, and she liked the particular brand of hand lotion. Crossing the green line, she fished out her dog tags and pulled them off one-handed as she reached the watch desk, just to the other side of the lock, smiled wearily at her several cousins of varying degree who sat that cheerless duty, and stuck the key tag into the portable comp unit while Danny Riley checked her off. It was Jamie and little Meg behind her. She turned and nodded them a courtesy, they 17 and 19, and her a lofty 25. That made her ma'am to them, and them a merest nod from her. She took her packages onto the check-in desk, stripped the packing materials off, and put the merchandise in the lidded bin a cousin offered her, with a grease-penciled Allison 2, Allison the Second. Sorry. With a grease-penciled Allison the Second on the end, aimed amid the smears of previous notes. Boy, I hope I muted that. Nearly 1,000 Dubliners returning with purchases, with most of their quarters inaccessible during dock and only an hour remaining before departure. It was impossible, otherwise, to handle that much personal cargo, and it had to be weighed and reckoned against individual mass allotment. There would be a scramble after first jump, while they were lazing their way across the first null point on their way to Pell, everyone going to the cargo master to collect their purchases. There was something psychological about it, like birthday packages, that everyone liked to have something waiting for that everyone liked to have something waiting for that sort out, be it only a bag of candy. And when a body went over mass, well, one could weigh it out again, too, and trade off, or consume the consumables, or pay the mass charge with overtime and sell off one's overmass at the next Port Liberty, along dockside, or, at some stations with liberal customs, in merchanters' bazaars, themselves a heady excitement of barter and docksiding stationers looking for exotica. A bin waited for packing materials. She stripped it all down, closed the lid, and watched her purchases go down the chute to cargo, walked on, burdenless. When Dublin had collected all the packaging and the debris, down to the last moment before the cargo hatch was sealed, out would pop a waste cylinder, everything from paper to reusable nylon, and station recycling would seize it and carry it off to be sorted, sifted, and used again. Dublin shifted nothing through jump but what was useful. Station threw nothing away that had to be freighted in, not even worn out clothing. "Are we still on schedule?" she asked the cousin nearest. "Last I heard," the woman said, the bell goes in about 45 minutes." Huh. She threw an involuntary glance at the desk clock and walked on through, burdenless, putting her dog tags to rights again, dodging past cousins with last-minute business in cargo, mostly maintenance who were taking wastage to the chute, and now and again someone with a personal bit of debris to jettison, a nuisance that should have been run through comp before now, but there was always someone trying to break through the line of incomers with something outgoing. There was at least a reasonable quiet about the traffic toward the lift. A few others her seniors, a few her junior, with some of the other unposteds. People in a hurry in uncommonly narrow spaces, because the great cylinder that was Dublin's body still sat in docking lock, and no one in dockside boots could take any corridors but the number ones. Unless that's could not take no one in dockside could take any corridors but the number ones. I'm going to go with its number one corridor. Yes. People in a hurry in uncommonly narrow spaces, because the great cylinder that was Dublin's body still sat in docking lock, and no one in dockside boots could take any corridors but the number ones. The rest remained dark, up the up curve of the intersecting halls, waiting the undock and start of rotation which would restore access to the whole circumference of the ship. The pale green of outer corridors became op-zone white. The dock smells which wafted in from the lock gave way to the bitingly crisp air, tiles and corridors and lighting panels in pristine pallor that would show any smudge or streak. Notoriously clean, because Dubliners in their youth spent hour on aching hour keeping the corridors that way. The lift, in the white zone, had a handful of cousins waiting for it. Allison nodded to the others and waited too. A glance and a hello to Deirdre, of her own year, another of her unit. Got of a Cato man, of on Esperance liberty, so it ran. Deirdre had that knit-browed absentia of a 4-day binge, a tendency to wince at noise. Allison folded her own arms and disdained to lean against the wall, being unposted exec, and not general crew, but her knees ached and her feet ached from walking, while she thought with longing of her own soft bunk in her quarters topside. "Good night?" someone asked. She blinked placidly at another unposted who had been with her in Tigers last night. "Yes," she said, thinking about it for a moment, drew in a breath, and favored Curran with a thoughtful glance. "What happened to yourself?" Curran grinned. That was all. The lift arrived, and seniors went on first. There was room for the three of them, herself and Deirdre and Curran, and a jam of others after that. The lift whisked them up to the second level, and they lost the juniors, who were bound for their own territory. It stopped again on Main, and they let the seniors off first, then followed through the corridor into the main lounge, into the din of laughter and conversation in a room as big as most station bars, curve floored, and with the float-based furniture now tilted out of trim with the ship's geometries. Posted crew and seniors gathered in the lounge beyond, and Allison wove her way through the center standing area to the archway, looked inside to find her mother, Megan, who was posted scan 24. "I'm back," she hand-signed past the noise, the gathering in the two lounges. Megan saw her and walked over, across the white line into the unposted lounge to talk to her. "I worried," Megan said. "Huh, I'm not about to miss the bell. Have a good stay?" "Got some new tapes. Nothing else?" Her mother grinned and went sober again, irrepressibly reached out and straightened her collar. The number ones are still in conference. We think we're going to get undocked on schedule. The military's talking to the old man now. No question about clearance, is there? She straightened the collar herself, minor irritants. I thought that was settled. Something about some papers on the cargo, transline protocols. Viking station master is insisting we re-enter Union space via Viking. We make no promises, and the military's backing us on it. The Bell's going on schedule, I'm betting. I don't see it's Viking's prerogative. Balance of trade, they say. They'll raise a fuss all the way to council. She frowned, glanced about as a heavy hand came down on her shoulder. It was her mother's half-brother, Jeff, dark-bearded, brows knit.
"Ali," her uncle said, "you mind how you go on the ducks?"
He was safe, Allison said.
"Huh,"
Jeff said, and looked past her at Megan.
"Mind this one, Meg. That fellow asked questions, Ali. Did you answer any?"
He wasn't curious, and no, nothing he couldn't get by asking anywhere. I asked the questions, Jeff, sir, and I was soberer than he was. State the names you know, Megan said, nowadays particularly. Ma'am, Allison said under her breath. Sir. Drew breath and ducked past with a pat on the shoulder as her half-sister Connie showed up to report in, relieving her of more discussion. There was no great closeness between herself and Connie, who was pregnant and occupied in that, whose study was archives and statistics. "'Lo, Connie," and "Hello, Ellie," was all that passed between them. Curran was closer, Jeff was, or Deirdre, but Megan loved freckled Connie, so that was well enough with Allison, who moderately liked her, at the distance of their separate lives. "Hello," she said to Ilis, who made a touch at her as she passed through the crowd, and "Ma'am," to her grandmother Allison, who on Rejuve was silver-haired, sterile, and looked no more than 40. She was 62. And there was great-grand Mina, Scan 2, who also looked 40, and was twice that. Seated crew, Mina, who was back in unposted territory talking to Ma'am herself, who was sitting down on one of the benches. Ma'am with a capital M. That was Colleen, whose rejuve was fading and who had gone dry and thin and wrinkled, but who still got about in the lounges during maneuvers despite brittle bones and stiffening joints. Ma'am was the point at which she was related to Curran and Deirdre both. Ma'am was retired Com 1, and kept the perks she had had in that post, but evidently chose not to be in council at the moment. Ma'am and Mina deserved courtesy on boarding, and Allison worked her way across the room and the noise and paid it, which Mina answered with a preoccupied nod, but Ma'am grabbed her hands, kissed her on the cheeks as if she had been one of the toddlers, and let her go again, talking past her to Mina non-stop in a low tone that involved the military and the rights of merchanters. Allison lingered half a breath, learned nothing, strayed away again, past the other hellos and the delicate tottering of a 2-year-old loose in the press. She found a bench and sat down, lost in the forest of standing bodies, glanced across the tops of red, contoured furniture which wrapped itself up the curve of the room. Some of the unposteds had stretched out sideways on the benches with their eyes shielded. Too much celebration, too late. The inevitable bands of knee-high youngsters yelled and darted as high on the floor curve as they could, occasionally taking a spill and risking being collared by one of their elders if their antics knocked into someone. Someone's baby was squalling. Probably Dia's. It always did, hating the noise. The older children squealed. It was their time to burn off all the energy, and it was part of their courage, the racing and the play and the I dare you approach to undock, that made a game of the maneuvers Dublin went through. It gave them nerve for the jump that was coming, which merchanter babies went through even unborn. These were the under fives, the youngsters loose among them. The 6s through 16s were up in the top side of the cylinder, where they spent most of their dockside time, and all of it for the 6 through 9s, in a topsy-turvy ceiling downside nursery, where a padded crawl-through made G reorientation only another rowdy, rumbling game. Every Dubliner remembered, with somewhat of nostalgia, how much better that was than this adult jam-up in the downside lounge. They gained no numbers in a generation. The matrilineal descent of merchanters generated new Dubliners of sleep-over encounters, with more concern for too few children than too many. Another was always welcome, and if one wanted half a dozen and another wanted none, that was well enough. It all balanced out from one generation to the next. Mam and Mina and Allison Senior came down, among others, to Megan and Jeff. Jeff had no line on Dublin, being male, but Megan had her and Connie, which balanced out. And Connie was already taking the line down another generation. Only Rejuve kept 5 and sometimes 6 generations living at once. Like Mam, who was pushing 150 and had faded only in the last decade, Mam, who had been Com 1 so long her voice was Dublin's in the minds of everyone. It still made shock waves, thin as it had gotten, when Mam made it snap and handed out an order. And there was still the retired old man, who had been the old man for most of Allison's life, and seldom got about now, snugged in his cabin that was downmost during dock, attended by someone always during jump, listening to tapes for his entertainment, and sleeping more and more. Allison herself was Helm 21, which was status among the unposteds. Third Helm's number, one of the alter-day shift. "What do you want to be?" Megan had asked her as early as she could remember the question. When a Dubliner was taking his first study tapes, he got the question, and started learning principles before awkward fingers could hold a pen or scrawl his letters, tape study from Dublin's ample library. "So what do you want to be?" Megan had asked, and she had wanted to be bridge crew, where lights flashed and people sat in chairs and did important things, and where the screens showed the stars and the stations. What do you want to be? The question came quarterly after that, and it went through a range of choices, until at 10, "I want to be the old man," she had said, before she had hardly gone out on a station dock or seen anything in the universe but the inside of Dublin's compartments and corridors. The king of the universe was the old man who sat in the chair and captained Dublin, the number one main day captain who ruled it all. "Be reasonable," Megan had told her then, taking her in the circle of her arms, setting her on the edge of the bed in her quarters, and trying to talk sense into her. "Only one gets to be the old man, and you know how many try the course and fail? Maybe 1 in 4 survives the grade to get into the line, and 1 in 50 gets to Helm 24, up where you're even going to sit a chair on watch. And after that, age is against you, because the sitting captains are too young. You go ask in library, Allie, how long the sitting captains are going to live, and then you do the math and figure out how long the number 2 chairs are going to live after taking their posts behind them, and how long it takes for Helm 24 to work up to posted crew." "Can't I try?" she had asked. And, "Yes, you can try," Megan had said. "I'm only telling you how it is." "Maybe there'll be an accident," she had thought to herself, with a 10-year-old's ruthless ambition. An accident to wipe out everyone in second helm. "You study everything," Megan had said, when she had complained about learning galley maintenance. "The helm course fits you for everything. So if you fail, you drop into whatever other track you're passing. You think Helm's just sitting in that chair. It's trade and routings, law, navigation and scan and comm and armaments. It's Jack and Jill of all trades, Allie, ma'am, and doing all the scut before you hand it out. And you can always quit, Allie, ma'am." "No, ma'am," she had said, and swallowed all they gave her, reckoning to be stubbornest the longest, and to make it all the way, because there was a craziness in her that, once launched, she had a kind of inertia that refused to be hauled down. Hauled down. She was Helm 21, and when Val retired, as she was likely to, Helm 6, and on the fading edge of rejuve, she would be Helm 20, and one more Dubliner got a post as Helm 24. He walked wide among the unposteds, being Helm. It had its perks. But Lally, over there, Maintenance 196, was second maintenance, second shift alter day at barely 21, posted main crew before her hair grayed, while Helm 21 had little chance indeed, with a possible 40 years until another seated helm decided to give it up and retire. She would be on rejuve before the list got her past Helm 20, would still be lording it over the unposteds, silver-haired and still not able to cross the line into the posteds lounge, still waiting, still working the number 2 bridge to stay current. She shut her eyes, leaned back, seeing Blue Dock again, and soldiers in their black uniforms. They talked about opening up Sol trade, shut down since the war, about opening the mothballed stations of the Hinder stars. They talked new routes and profits to be made, putting their hand into Alliance territory, creating a loop that would link the Union stars to the Pell-based Alliance. Trade and politics. So much she knew, sitting in on Dublin executive councils, which was all of Helm and only sitting crew of other tracks. She knew all the debate, whether Dublin should take the chance, whether they should just sit out the building and wait for the accomplished fact. But Dublin had always stood with one foot on either side of a crisis, always poised herself ready to move to best advantage, and the Merchanters' Alliance, once an association of merchanter captains who disputed union, now held the station at Pell's Star for a capital, declared itself a sovereign government, passed laws, in short, passed laws, in short, looked like a power worth having a foot inside. A clean record with Union, a clean record with the Alliance thus far, since Dublin had operated far out of the troubled zones during the war. She could get herself a Pell account opened, and if that new trade really was opening up there, then Dublin could get herself dual papers. Union Council was in favor of it, wanted moderates like themselves in the alliance, good, safe Union side haulers who would vote against Pell's side interests as the thing got bigger. Union talked about building merchant ships and turning them over to good, safe Union siders like Dublin to increase their numbers, which talk quickened Allison's pulse. A new ship to outfit would strip away all the second helm of Dublin and get her posted on the spot. She had lived that thought for a year. But more and more it looked like a lot of talk and maintenance of the status quo. Rapprochement was still the operative word in Union, Alliance and Union snuggling closer and closer together after their past differences, recontacting Sol after the long silence in an organized way, clearing the pirates out, all merchanters having equal chance at the new ships that might be built. Hopes rose and fell. At the moment they were fallen, and she took wild chances on dockside. Jeff was right. Stupidity. But it had helped, with the soldiers crawling all over station that close to crossing the line into foreign space. So she scattered a bit of her saved credit on a fellow who could use a good drink and a good sleepover. In a wild impulse of charity, it might have been good to have scattered a bit more on him. He looked as if he could have used it. But touchy proud. He would not have taken it. Or would have, being hungry, and hated her for it. There had been no delicate way. He fell behind her in her mind, as Viking did, as all stations did after they sealed the hatch. If she thought persistently of anyone, it was Charlie Bodart of Silver Bell, green-eyed, easy-going Charlie, Com 12 of his ship, who crossed her path maybe several times a loop, Silver Bell and Dublin running one behind the other. But not now. Not to Pal across the line. Goodbye to Silverbell and all that was familiar, at least for the subjective year. And it might be a long time before they got back on Charlie's schedule, if ever. A body hit the cushion beside her, heavy and male. She opened her eyes and turned her head in the din of voices. Curran.
Why, Curran said, hung over? You got a face on you.
Not much sleep.
I'll tell you about not much sleep.
I'll bet you will. She looked from him to the clock, and the bell was late. I got along. I got those fiches, too, and a couple of bottles.
We'll have those killed before we get to Pearl.
We'll have to kill them at dock if they don't get the soldier lads organized and get us out of here.
I think they've got it straightened away,
Curran said. Helm 22, Curran right behind her in the sequence. Dark-haired, like enough for a brother, and close to that.
I heard that from the mom.
I hope. She folded her arms, gathered up her cheerfulness. I had an offer, I want you to know. My friend last night was looking for crew. Number one and only on his own ship. Number one and only on his own ship, he said. Offered me a Helm 2 chair, he did. At least that's what I think he was offering. Curran chuckled. It was worth a laugh, a marginer making offers to Dublin. And not so deep a laugh, because it touched hopes too sensitive, that they both shared.
Cousin Allie!
That shrill piping was aged 4, and barreled into her unbraced lap, to be picked up and bounced. Allison caught her breath, hauled Tish up on her leg, bounced her once dutifully, and passed her with a toss over to Curran, who hugged the imp and rolled her off his lap onto the empty cushion beside him.
Going to go,
Tish said, having, at 4, gotten the routine down pat.
going to walk all round Dublin.
Pretty soon,
Curran said.
Live up there,
Tish said, jabbing a fat finger ceilingward.
my baby up there.
Next time you remember to bring your baby down, Allison said. You bring her with you the next time we dock. There had been no end of the wail over the forgotten doll at the start of their liberty. Middle zones of the ship went inaccessible during dock, and young Will the Third had offered to eel through the emergency accesses after it. But no, it was a lark for Will, but a good way to take a fall. And Tish learned to keep track of things. Everyone learned. Early.
Go,
Tish crowed, anxious. Prolonged dock was no fun for the littlest, in cramped spaces and adult noise. Bye, Allison said, and Tish slid down and worked her way through adult legs to bedevil some of her other several hundred cousins, while Allison shut her eyes and wished the noise would stop. Her wishes were narrow at the moment, centered on her own comfortable, clean-smelling bed. Then the bell rang, the Cinderella stroke that ended liberty and liberties, and the children were shushed and taken in arms. Conversations died. People remembered hangovers and feet and knees that ached from walking unaccustomed distances on the docks, recalling debts run up that would have to be worked off odd jobbing.
I lied,
Someone said, louder than other voices, the old joke, admitting that after the bell accounts were always less colorful. There was laughter, not at the old joke, but because it was old and comfortable and everyone knew it. They drifted for the cushions, and there was a general snapping and clicking of belts, a gentle murmur, a last fretting of children. Allison bestirred herself to pull her belt out of the housings and to clip it as Eyeless settled into the seat next to hers and did the same. Bacchanal was done. The old man was back in the chair again, and the posted crew, having put down their authority for the stay on station, took it up again. Dublin prepared to get under way.
Gumbo indeed, Capybara. I'm sorry, I did not look at my comments until now. It's only an hour late. Chapter 3. Lucy was never silent in her operation. She had her fan noises and her pings and her pops and crashes as some compressor cycled in or a pump went on or off. Her seating creaked and her rotation rumbled and grumbled around the core, a rotating ring with a long null-G center and belly that was her hold, a stubby set of generation vanes stretched out on top and ventral sides. That was the shape of her. She moved along under in-system propulsion, doing her no-cargo best, toward the Viking jump range, outbound, on the assigned lane a small ship had to use. Sandor reached and put the interior lights on, and Lucy's surroundings acquired some cheer and new dimensions. Rightward, the corridor to the cabins glared with what had once been white tiles, bare conduits painted white like the walls, and to the left another corridor horizoned up the curve, lined with cabinets and parts storage. Aft of the bridge and below the shallowest of arches, another space showed, reflected in the idle screens of vacant stations, bunks in brown, worn plastic, 12 of them, that could be set manually for the pitch at dock. Their common room, that had been. Their in-dock sleeping area, living quarters, wardroom, whatever the need of the moment. He set Lucy's autopilot, unbelted, and eased himself out of the cushion. That was enough to get himself a stiff fine if station caught him at it, moving through the vicinity of a station with no one at controls. He found the pulsar unit in under the counter storage, taped it to his wrist, and handed himself across the bridge, fighting the spiral drift along to the right-hand corridor, a controlled stagger with right foot along the tiled footing curve and left on the deck. He got the pharmaceuticals he wanted and brought them back to his place on the bridge, another stagger down the footings and swing along the hand grips. Then he knelt down in the pit and used tape and braces to rig her as she had been rigged before, taped the drugs he would need for jump to the side of the armrest where he could get at them, taped down some of the safety controls, also illegal. He set up the rig for the sanitation kit, because he would need that too, much as he dreaded it. A second trip, rightward this time, past sealed cabins, into the narrow confines of the galley and galley storage. He filled water bottles and took an armful of them back to the bridge, jammed them into the brace he had long ago rigged near the command console. Scared, if he'd let himself think about it. He swallowed such feelings, bobbed his head up now and again to check scan, down again to open up the underdeck storage where he had shoved some of the dried goods, not to have to suit up for the chill of the holds to hunt for them. He knelt there counting the packets out, taped them where he could get at them from the chair. His braced limbs shook from the strain of G. He dropped a packet and lunged after it, taped it where it belonged. The lane still showed clear. He crawled up and held onto the back of the cushion, staring at the instruments, finally edged his way back to one of the brown plastic bunks at the aft bulkhead, to give his back a little relief from the strain. His eyes stung with fatigue. He rested his hands beside him, arms pulled askew by the spiral stress of acceleration, leaned his head against the bulkhead, not really comfortable, but it was a change from the long-held position in the cushion, and he could get the comm or the controls from here if he had to. As a little aside, the reason his excuse of getting a message that he has to deliver urgently works is because they don't really have faster than light communication in this setting. They don't have, for instance, an Ansible from the Ender's Game series. So all communiques and information transmission is done uh, by ships, which can move faster than the speed of light. How the FTL actually works in this universe is sort of left up to the imagination. Suffice it to say, it does, and it is stressful.
The lane showed clear. He crawled up and held onto the back of the cushion, staring at the instruments, finally edged his way back to one of the brown plastic bunks at the aft bulkhead, to give his back a little relief from the strain. His eyes stung with fatigue. He rested his hands beside him, arms pulled askew by the spiral stress of acceleration, leaned his head against the bulkhead, not really comfortable, but it was a change from the long I just read this. But it was a change from the long-held position of the cushion, and he could get the comm or the controls from here if he had to. There were compartments all about the ring, private quarters. Diametrically opposite the bridge was the loft, where the children had been. He never went around the ring that far. This was home, this small space, these bunks aft of the bridge, plastic mattresses patched with tape and deteriorating with age. One had been his when he was 10, that over there, nearest the partition spinward. And there had been Papa Lou's, which he never sat on, and one his mother's. He had had brothers and sisters and cousins once, and there had been 3 children under 6, cousins too. But Papa Lou had vented them, and old Mam too, when their boarders turned ugly and it was clear what they were going to do. They had had Lucy's armament, but they had been helpless against a carrier and its riderships. They had had only 2 handguns on the ship, and the boarders who had ambushed them in the null point had said they were not touching crew, only cargo. It had been Lucy's clear choice then, open the hatch or be blown entirely. But they lied, the Maziani, pirates even then, in the years when they had called themselves the Company Fleet, and fought for Pell and Earth. They respected nothing, and counted life nothing, and into such hands Papa Lou had surrendered them, not understanding. He himself had not understood. He had not imagined. He had looked at the armored, faceless invaders with a kind of awe, a child's respect of such power. He had, for that first few moments they had been aboard, wanted to be one of them, wanted to carry weapons and to wear such sleek, frightening armor. For one brief, ugly temptation, until he had seen Papa Lou afraid, and begun to suspect that something evil had come into the ship's heart. He always felt guilt when he recalled that he had admired, that he had wanted to frighten others and not be frightened. He reasoned with himself that it was only the glitter that had drawn him, and that any child would have reacted the same in the confusion, in the shaking of reliable references, in ignorance if not in innocence. But he always felt unclean. Most of it had happened here, on the bridge, in the common room and the corridor, in this widest part of the ship where they had gathered everyone but the children, and where the boarders started showing what they meant to do. But Papa Lou had gotten to the command chair and voided the part of the ship where the children and the oldest had taken refuge, before they shot him, before they shot him. And most of them had died, shot down in the common room and on the bridge, and some of them had been taken away for slower treatment. But 3 of them, himself and old Mitri and cousin Ross, had lain there in the blood and the confusion because they were half dead. Himself aged 10 and standing with crew because he had slipped around the curve and gotten to his mother's side. They had not died, they 3, which was Ross's doing, because Ross was mad stubborn to live, and because after they had been left adrift, Ross had dragged himself from beside the bunk where he had fallen on him and Mitri, had gotten the med kit that was spilled all over where the pirates had rifled it for drugs. That was where his mother had been lying shot through the head. He recalled that all too vividly. She had gotten one of the boarders at the last, because they had given the women the 2 guns. They needed them the most, Papa Lou had said. And when Papa Lou vented the children, his mother had shot one of the boarders before they shot her, got an armored man right in the faceplate, and killed him. And they dragged him off with them when they left the ship, probably because they wanted the armor back. But Aunt Jane had died before she could get a clear shot at any of them. Here they had fallen. Here. 12 bodies, and more in the corridor rightward, and himself and Mitri and Ross. Those were his memories at times like this, fatigued and mind-numbed, or cooking a solitary meal in the galley, or walking past vacant cabins, sights that washed out all the happier past, everything that had been good, behind one red-running image. Everywhere he walked and sat and slept, someone had died. They had scrubbed away all the blood and made the plastic benches and the tiles and the plating clean again, and they had vented their dead at that lonely null point, undisturbed once the pirate had gone its way, sent them out in space where they probably still drifted, frozen solid and lost in infinity, about the cinder of an almost star. It was a clean, decent disposal, after the ugliness that had gone before. In his mind they still existed in that limbo, never decayed, never changed. They went on traveling, no suit between them and space, all the starry sights they had loved passing continually in front of their open, frozen eyes. A company of travelers that would stay more or less together, wherever they were going. All of them. Only Mam and the babies had gone ahead, and the others would never overtake them. Mitri had died out on the hull one of the times they had had to change Lucy's name, when they had run the scam on Pan Paris. And it had gone sour. A stupid accident that had happened because the Maziani had stripped them of equipment that they needed. Ross had spent 4 hours and risked his life getting Mitri back because they had thought there was hope. But Mitri had been dead from the first few moments, the pressure in the suit having gone and blood having gotten into the filters. So Ross just called to say so and stripped the suit and let Mitri go. Another of Lucy's drifters. But all alone this time. And he, 12, had sat alone in the ship, shivering, sick with fear that something would happen to Ross, that he would not get back, that he would die getting Mitri in. Leave him, he had yelled at Ross, his own cowardice, before he had even known that Mitri was dead. He remembered that, and remembered the lonely sound of Ross crying into the mic when he knew. He had thrown up from fright after Ross had come in safe. Another lonely null point, those points of mass between the burning suns that jump ships used to steer by, and he could not have gotten Lucy out of there, could not have handled the jump on his own, if he had lost Ross then. He had cried, after that, and Mitri had haunted him, a shape that tumbled through his dreams, the only one of Lucy's ghosts that reproached him. Ross had Ross had died on Wyatt's, dealing with people who tried to cheat him. The stationers, beyond doubt, had cremated him, so one of them was forever missing from the tally of drifters in the deep. In a way, that troubled him most of all, that he had had to leave Ross in the hands of strangers, to be destroyed down to his elements. But he had had only the quick chance to break Lucy away, to get her out before they attached her, and he kept her. He had been 17 then, and knew the contacts and the ports and how to talk to customs agents. He slept in Ross's old bunk, in this one, because it was as close as he could come to what he had left of family, and this one bed seemed warmer than the rest, not so unhappily haunted as the rest. Ross had always been closer than his own mind to him, and because he had not cast out Ross's body with his own hands, it was less sometimes like Ross was dead than that he had gone invisible after the mishap at Wyatt's, and still existed aboard, in the programs Comp held. So meticulously, Ross had recorded all that he knew, programmed every operation, left instructions for every eventuality. In case, Ross had said, simply in case. The recorded alarms spoke in Ross's tones, the time signals did, and the instruction. It was company, of a sort. Of a sort. It filled the silences. He tried not to talk to the voice more than need be, seldom spoke at all while he was on the ship, because he reckoned that the day he started talking back and forth with Comp, he was in deep trouble. Only this time he sat with his eyes fixed on the screens on the bridge, with his shoulder braced against the acceleration, and a vast lethargy settled over him in the company of his ghosts. Ross, he thought. Ross. I might love her. Because Ross was the closest thing he had ever had to a father, a personal father, and he had to try out the thought on someone, just to see if it sounded reasonable. It did not. There were story tapes, a few aged tapes Ross had conned on Pan Paris when they were young and full of chances. He listened to them over and over and conjured women in his mind, but he knew truth from fancy and refused to let fancy take a grip on him. It had to do with living and solitude, and there were slippages he could not afford. He had been drunk, that was all, was sober now, and simply tired. He had been crazy into the bargain, to have paid what he had paid to get clear of station. And he was outbound, accelerating, committed. He was headed for a real place out there, was about to violate lane instructions, headed out to new territory with forged papers. It was a real place, and a real meeting, where a dream could get badly bent. Where it could end. Forever. Ross, I'm scared. No noise but the fans and the turning of the core, that ever-present white sound in which the rest of the silence was overwhelming. Little human sounds like breathing, like the dropping of a stylus, the pushing of a button, were whited out, swallowed, made null. Ross, this may be the last trip. I'm sorry. I'm tired. That was the crux of it. The certainty settled into his bones. The last trip, the last time, because he had run out of civilized stations Union side. Even Pell, across the line, they had called at once, when it was himself and Ross and Mitri together, and Lucy had been Rose. They owed money there, too, as everywhere. Lucy was out of havens, and he was out of answers, tired of fear, tired of starving and sleeping the way he had slept on the way into Viking, marginally afraid that the old man he had hired might rob him or get past the comp lock, or, it was always possible, kill him in his sleep. And once, just once, to see what others had, what life was like outside that terror, with the fancy bars and the fancy sleepovers, and a woman with something other than larceny in mind. He had never had a place to go before, never had a destination. He had lived in this narrow compartment most of his life, and only planned what he would do to avoid the traps behind him. Pell, Allison Riley said, and deals. And it agreed with the rumors that there were routes opening. Hope. Hope for marginers like him. It was a joke, of course, the best joke of a humorous career. A surprise for Allison Riley. She would turn and stare open-mouthed when he tapped her on the shoulder in some crowded Pell Station bar. He knew what Lucy could do, and what he could do, that great modern ship of hers would never try. Stupid, she would say. That was so. But she would always think about it, that a little ship had run jump for jump against Dublin. And that was something of a mark to make in his life, if nothing else. There was, in a sense, more of Lucy left than there was of there was, in a sense, more of Lucy left than there was of him, because there was no end to the traveling and no end to the demands she made on him. He had given all he had to keep her going, and now he wanted something out of her for his pride. He had no name left. Lucy had none. So he did this crazy thing. in its place. He shut his eyes, yielded to that G that pressed him uncomfortably against the bulkhead, drowsing while he could. The pulsar was taped to his wrist so that the first beep from the outrange buoy would bring him out of it. Station would have his head on a plate if they knew, but it was all the chance he had to go into jump with a little rest. The pulsar stung his wrist, brought him out of it when it only felt as if he had fallen asleep for a second. He lurched in blind fright for the controls and sat down and realized it was only the initial contact of the jump range buoy and engine shutdown on schedule. Number 1 for jump, it told him, and advised him that there was another ship behind. A chill went up his back when he reckoned its bulk and its speed and the time. That was Dublin, outbound, overtaking him much more slowly, he suspected, than it could, because of their order of departure. Because Lucy, ordinarily low priority, was close enough to the mark now that Dublin was compelled to hang back off her tail. The automated buoy was going to give them clearance the automated buoy was going to give them clearance one on the tail of the other because the buoy's information, transmitted from Station Central, indicated they were not going out in the same direction. And that was wrong. He checked his calculations, rechecked and triple-checked, lining everything up for an operation far more ticklish than calculating around the aberrations of Lucy's docking jets. Null points moved, being more than planet-sized mass, in the complicated motions of stars. Comp had to allow for that. No one sane would head into jump alone, with a comp that had no backup, with trank and food and water taped to the board. He told himself so, making his prep, darting glances back to comp and scan, listening to the buoy beeping steadily, watching them track right down the line. He put the trank into his arm. It was time for that, to dull the senses which were about to be abused. Not one jump to face, but 3, and if he missed on one of them, he reckoned, he would never know it. There was speculation as to what it was to be strung out in the in-between, and speculation about what the human mind might start doing once the drugs wore off and there was no way back. There were tales of ships which wafted in and out of jump like ghosts with eerie wails on the receiving calm, damned souls that never came down and never made port and never died, in time that never ended. But those were drunken fancies, the kind of legends which wandered station docksides when crews were topping one another with pints and horror tales, deliberately frightening stationers and in-system spacers who believed every word of such things. He did not, above all, want to think of them now. He had little enough time to do anything hereafter but keep Lucy tracking and keep his wits about him if things went wrong. If he made the smallest error in calculation, he could spend a great deal of time at the first null point getting himself sorted out, and he could lose Dublin. The transit, empty as he was, would use up a month or more subjective time, and Dublin would shave that, would laze her way across the space of each null point, maybe several days, maybe a week resting up, and head out again. Lucy did not have such leisure. He had no plans to dump all velocity where he was going, could not do that and hope to outpace Dublin's deeper stitches into the between. The trank was taking hold. He thought of Dublin behind him and the hazard of it. He reached for the comm, punched it in, narrow-focused the transmission, a matter between himself and that sleek, huge merchanter that came on his tail. Dublin, this is US 48-335Y Lucy, number 1 for jump. Advise you the buoy is in error. I'm bound for Pell. Repeat, buoy information is in error. I'm bound for Pell. Don't crowd my departure. Lucy's cold eye located the appropriate reference star, bracketed it, and he saw that. The terror he ought to feel eased into a bland, tranked consciousness in which death itself might be a sensation mildly entertaining. He started the jump sequence, pushed the button which activated the generation vanes while the buoy squalled protest about his track. Felt it start, the sudden, irreversible surety that bizarre things were happening to matter and to him, that things were racing faster and faster and faster. Conscious again and still tranked, hyper and sedated at once, a peculiar coincidence of mental states in which he was aware of alarms ringing and Lucy doing her mechanical best to tell him she was carrying dangerous residual velocity. The power it took to dump had to be measured against the power it took to acquire. No dice throws. Calculate. Move the arm, punch the buttons. Dump the speed down to margin or lose the ship on the next. Wesson's Point. Present location. Wesson's Point. In the appropriate jump range. Entry proceeding toward dark mass. Plot bypass curve down to margin. Remember the acquire/dump balance. Sandy. That was Ross's comp's voice. Sandy, wake up. Get the comp. There were other voices that sang to him through the hum of dissolution. Dead, Sandor. All dead. Sandy, wake up. Time to wake up. Vent. Acceptable stress. Set to auto and trank out for time of passage. Set cushion and pulsar. 2 hours, 2 minutes crossing the null point. Set. Mark. Dead, Sandor. All dead. He came out of sleep with the pulsar stinging his wrist, and with an ache all the way to his heels, unbelted and leaned over the left side of the cushion to dry heave for a moment, collapsed over that armrest, weighing far more than he thought he should, and caring far less about survival than he should, because he had gone into this too tired, with his defenses too depressed, and the trank was not wearing off. He ought to be attending to controls. He had to get something to eat and drink because he was going again in half an hour, and that was too little time. He reached down and got one of the foil packets, managed with palsied fingers to get it open, and got the ripped corner to his lips. Chewed food which had no taste but salt and copper, felt after the water and sucked mouthfuls of that, dropped the empty foil and the empty bottle, felt the food lying inert in his stomach, unwanted. He got the other shot home, beginning to trank out again. Forced his eyes to focus on the boards, while Lucy shot her way along at a hairbreadth margin from disaster. Sometimes there was other junk ringing a null point, a dark platelet of rocks and ice and maybe lost spacers who used the deep dark of this place for a tomb. He held his eyes open, alternately trying to throw up and trying to cope with the flow of data which Comp itself had to sort and dump in a special mode because it came so fast. Still blind, ripping along at a velocity that would fling even a smallish planet into his path before the computer could deal with it. Lucy headed for the other side of the null point's gravity well with manic haste, but in that close pass they had gotten bent as light was bent, and the calculations had to take that into account. He sat there ignoring the scan blindness into which they were rushing, trying to tell by the fluttering passage of data whether the numbers converged, reality with his calculations, trying to learn if there was error in position, and how that was going to translate in jump. And screaming in the back of his mind was the fact that he was playing tag with a very large ship which could play games with distances which Lucy barely made, in a time differential he could not calculate, and that on some quirk of malign fate he could still run into them if they just happened to coincide out here. Dublin was either here now or out ahead of him, because his lead was going to erode and change to lag somewhere in the transit. Ships missed each other because space was wide and coincidences were statistically more than rare, but not when two ships were playing leapfrog in the same null points. Second jump. Statistically better this time. A vast point, three large masses in juxtaposition, a kink in the between that hauled ships in and slung them along in a complicated warping. Dump it now. Dump the speed down.
Wake up, Sandy.
And his own voice, pre-recorded. The referent now is Pelstar. Push the track reset, Sandy. The track reset. He located the appropriate button, stared entranced at the screen. No rest possible here. The velocity was still extreme. His tongue was swollen in his mouth. He took another of the water bottles and drank, hurting. Food occurred to him. The thought revolted him. He reached none the less and located the packet. Ate, because it was necessary to do. He was crazy, that was what. He swallowed in mechanical, untasting gulps, unable to remember what buttons he had pushed, trusting his own recorded voice giving him the sequences as Comp needed them, trusting to that star he saw bracketed ahead of him, if that was not itself a trick of a mind which had come loose in time. He recalled Dublin. If Alison Riley knew remotely what he was doing this moment, she would curse him for the risk to her ship. He ought to dump more of the velocity he had, right now, because he was scared. Tri-point was deadly dangerous, with no margin for high-speed errors. But Lucy was moving with the sureness of a woman with her mind made up, and he was caught in that horrible impetus and the solid power of her, because a long time ago she had hollowed him out and taken all there was of him. He moved in a continual blue of slow motion, while the universe passed at much faster rates. There was debris in this place. He was passing to zenith of the complicated accretion disk. So he hoped. If he had miscalculated, he died, in an impact that would make a minor, unnoticed light. He dumped down. The recorded voice told him to. He obeyed. The data coming in sorted itself into more manic strings of numbers. He punched in when the voice told him, froze a segment, matched up, found a correspondence with his plotted course. He grinned to himself, still scared witless, human component in a near-sea projectile, and stared at the screens with trank, dulled eyes. He kicked into Pell jump range with velocity that had the incoming range buoy screaming its automated indignation at him, advising whatever lunatic had just come within its scan that he was traveling too fast and headed dead on for trafficked zones. Dump, it warned him, Dopplered and restructured by his comm. Its systems were hurling machine-to-machine warnings at Lucy's auto-alert, which Lucy was primed to obey. She was kicking in the veins in hard spurts, which shifted him in and out of real space in bursts of flaring nausea. There were red lights everywhere until he hit the appropriate button and confirmed the dump order Lucy was obeying. And on that dramatic note, something of a cliffhanger, we will call it for this week. This Wednesday, sorry. Um, so yeah, it is a taut book. It is very claustrophobic. These sequences are relentless. There's a lot more of these coming. Um, it's a fun one. I'm very enamored with it. I had gotten the book it was attached to because I was trying to get 40,000 in Gehenna, and oh, they have a combined edition that has that and another book, and I read that. I read Merchanter's Luck first and was like, oh, this is awesome. This is very much my jam. Um, Reminds me fondly of some of the more frenetic sequences of Heavy Time and Hellburner. She's good at those.
When we get to Citeen, it's going to be rather different. That is a much more placid book. It's more laconic. It is much more measured. A lot is going on, but it's less action sequence heavy and much more drama heavy. It's very good. I think it's very good. I shouldn't say that as an indisputable fact, but I think it's fair to say it is an indisputable fact that Citeen is very good. It is a very well written book, and C.J. Cherry should be proud of everything she's written. She's very, very talented. Criminally underrated, in my opinion. Um, Rated well. I think anybody who's read her work can generally attest that she is quite good at what she do. Um, but she deserves more recognition, in my opinion. So that's why I'm doing these, even though basically everything she's ever done has an audiobook floating around somewhere um, that someone has done at some point in time. Uh, anyway, that'll do it for this Wednesday. This Friday, we'll be reading more of Death's End. For anyone wondering what my dilemma was for today, what my choices were, I was um, rolling with multiple options. I was keeping my options open. I was tempted to do Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. I don't think I'm pronounced Gile Clark? Gili? I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Uh, P. Gile Clark. Um, P. DeJelly? I don't know. Which is, for Juneteenth, which is generally a book about rising up against oppression and racism. It's very entertaining. A short romp. Another choice I had was Escapology by Ren Warum, which is basically Neuromancer by William Gibson. And Neuromancer by William Gibson was my other choice. Last night I was staying up late grabbing cover art for all of them to because I knew I wasn't going to have a decision made. Um, and eventually, I just wound up settling on doing Merchanter's Luck because I'm like, I'm on a CJ Cherry kick. Why not? Merchanter's Luck isn't so long. Um, we could do a break after that and read something else. Anyway, I went with the path of least resistance? Question mark. I don't know that I'll do 40,000 in Gehenna right afterwards. I think I do want to do Rim Runners before I do that. Um, it doesn't tie in to Rim Runners. 40,000 in Gehenna takes place over a pretty lengthy time scale. Um, like it stretches on into, I think, after even the events of Citeen. But it starts before Citeen does. So I treat it as sort of a pseudo prequel. It has some significance to Citeen for reasons that I believe 40,000 in Gehenna makes fairly clear. Uh, and then Citeen takes to some logical conclusions, and it's like, oh, this is why this is significant, and these are the impacts that this had. Uh, Yep, that's it. I will see you all Friday. There were a lot of people tuned in early. Now we're down to a much more consistent number. Well, still a fair number of people watching. So hi to yous all. Um, if ever you want to throw me some feedback, please do not hesitate to do so. It is always appreciated. Um, what I do with it at that point is entirely up to me, though. Uh, but never hesitate to throw me some feedback because it's the only way I know if I'm doing something right or wrong. Uh, anyway, something else. Something else bugging me at the back of my head. There's something else nagging at the back of my sanity. Anyway, yeah, so I'll see you all Friday, maybe, and we will continue reading fun books. That is my plan. I don't intend to read you books that I find unfun. It is not likely to occur. Thank you, Derby Shark. I appreciate it. Uh, if people do want me to like make, I've mentioned this before and I've gotten no real response. If people do want me to post the collections of the cover art I'm using, um, I'll do so on the Discord because those aren't terribly large. Um, I can't guarantee that it's every single cover that a given book has had, but it is the most of the ones that I've ever found uh, easily with minimal effort on the Webernets, so people can see those and use them if they want. I do think this one's a lot of fun. This one is very interesting. It's some radically different pacing. Um, it is pretty close to what I call peak CJ Cherry when the action is going and things are just like it's moving very fast. She's throwing a lot of detail at you. There's subtext being thrown at you. There's context being thrown at you very quickly. Um, and it is a challenge for sure for me to read aloud, but she is very it's stuff like this that just really gets like I get sweaty reading this. It's like it's so intense. I'm so into it. Um, it's good fun. Um, we have this really interesting dichotomy too that the book has going on between we have a bit of station life, uh, and then the contrast mostly between life on Dublin again and life on Lucy, which are radically different, very different animals. But it's giving you this really interesting perspective into what's life like for just people living in this universe, as opposed to, oh, these are heroes of a generation, they're defining events. Down Below Station is pretty close to let's have characters that are like main characters of the events that are occurring, but even then it's kind of like our main characters aren't really super relevant except kind of around the margins. um, like Emilio Constantin, what he does is important in terms of kind of helping set up a resistance to Pori's troops and the Mazian troops. Um, Damon Constantin and Josh Talley are both basically relevant to what happens like right at the end, but they're not really in control of events as they're moving. And that's one of the things I think that I like most about CJ Cherry is like rarely often she does plenty of stuff where like the protagonists are very clearly this is their story, but and the universe is their oyster sort of thing. But a lot of my favorite work by her, it's like these people are just they're in this world that feels very lived in, and they have a place in it and they do things in it, and there's these great events happening, but they're not really in control of any of them except for maybe small key moments that aren't even all that important at the time but like kind of cascade into something relevant later. um, Cytine and Regenesis less so, for reasons that will become clear when we get there. But this book, it's like this guy, um, Sandy, he's a literal who. He's a nobody. This story is about him, but the world is not about him. It's one of the things I really like about her, the universe she's set up, is it feels very lived in. Um, like you can throw any character with any kind of a story in there, and you can do something with them. There's room for that person to live there and feel believable. So it's a pretty good one. I think it really grew on me. I think the first when I started reading it, I'm like, okay, what are we going with? Where are we going with this? Down Below Station, this dramatic event happens at the end of Down Below Station. How do you follow that up? It's like, well, this is how you follow it up. It's just some guy, and this is what the world is like. He winds up being some interesting things are going to happen. Like we're going to have like impactful things occur, but mostly it's just about some dude. Um, who's kind of fallen for this girl who is so far out of his league it is unreal. And he knows it. We've already given hints for why she might be interested, though. Um, so it's we're going places. It's a fun one. It's a fun one. Yeah, I think that'll do it. All right, so I will see yous all laters, and yeah, have fun, stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, and I should probably start tacking things on every year. Um, I'm not going to think of one now. It sort of looks like it wants to rain, but it's not sure. Like there's blue sky over there, but there's definitely wind picking up. Could be rain. Anyway, sees you all later. Toodaloo!